I'm really pleased to introduce the next topic, which is confronting the climate crisis and cultivating spiritual courage. It's really the Jewish perspective on climate change. And we have with us today Vicki Kaplan, who's an organizer, activist, and campaigner committed to movement building and anti-racism. As an organizing director and campaigner at Move On, from 2012 to 2020, she oversaw organizing programs, mobilizations, election campaigns, then engaged and developed the leadership of tens of thousands of activists. And prior to Move On, Vicki worked with communities around the country to shut down dirty coal plants. She was a labor and human rights organizer in the Midwest, and she campaigned to protect water as a public resource. And her organizing work has been featured in the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, and the LA Times. And Vicki now is the director of organizing and strategist with Dayenu, which is an organization, a Jewish call for climate action. She's now going to share how U.S. Jewish communities are responding to the climate crisis and provide a briefing on climate action opportunities in California in 2024. Vicki, I'm going to turn it over to you. And thank you again for joining us today. And I'll just remind everybody, encourage you to use the speaker view so you don't get distracted by all the little photographs.
Thank you so much, Joel. And thank you, Bill, as well, for your help with today's arrangement. And thank you to all of you for making it here on Zoom today. I'm sorry we're not able to be in person, but glad that everyone is home and safe, staying off the roads. My name is Vicki Kaplan, and I'm Director of Organizing and Strategist at Dayenu, a Jewish call to climate action. I'm so happy to be here with you all. It's truly an honor to follow Zev Yaroslavsky. Wow. I was glad to get to listen in on his talk for a little bit. Dayenu is a relatively new organization. We launched almost 4 years ago. I was the fourth staff person, joining Rabbi Jenny Rosen, Dayenu's founder and CEO. And now our staff is 15 people across the United States. And I'm delighted as well to introduce you today to my colleague, Avery Weinman, who recently joined the Dayenu staff as our Southern California organizer. So Avery is actually here to help build the Jewish climate movement in Southern California, and we'll be sharing some opportunities over the next hour for how you can all be involved, including at an in-person summit with multiple congregations in the Southern California area this May. So Avery, do you want to just unmute and say hello for a moment, introduce yourself?
Yeah, of course. Thanks so much for that introduction, Vicki. So as you just mentioned, my name is Avery. I just joined Dayenu about 2 weeks ago, I believe, as a part-time organizer located here in LA in Southern California. And please feel free to be in touch with me at any time. As you guys listen to this talk, as Vicki said, you'll hear some opportunities that are coming up if you want to get more involved. And I highly recommend you to get in touch with me. I'd love to chat with anyone in the near future. So I'll give it back to you now, Vicki.
Thanks, Avery. And I'm especially delighted to have been invited to speak to VBS. I grew up in Los Angeles. I went to Adat Shalom, another conservative congregation in West LA as a kid, had my bat mitzvah there, and went to many a bar and bat mitzvah at VBS growing up in Los Angeles. So it's good to be organizing here at home. I'm going to have some slides to share a little bit later on. We'll also have a text study that instead of doing in Havruta or in pairs, we'll do as a big group. We'll have time for Q&A, and then I'll have some invitations for action for everybody. But to start out, if you're near your chat on the Zoom, get your fingers ready and think for a moment, when you think about climate change, how do you feel? Like, what feeling bubbles up? A word or two. Think for a moment. It's always good to go with like your first instinct. And then type that word or couple of words into the chat. Don't press enter yet. And I'm going to give us a countdown. I'm going to say 3, 2, 1. And then when I say 1, then press enter and we'll like see everybody, the cascade of emotions. And then we'll react to those, to each other's emotions. Okay. Can I get like, for people who have their videos on, can you give me like a thumbs up if you're ready? You've got your word, you've typed it in. Okay. Few people are ready. Okay, ready? 3, 2, 1. Hit enter. More will come in, Joel. Your fear, anxiety, and worry won't just sit there alone.
There's others who share my anxiety. I see that.
Oh, are people only able to send messages to the hosts?
Oh yeah, they're all going to me.
They're all going to you. Okay, that's all right, Joel.
So
you're
what
gonna be
I'll read to the.
You're going to read them out. Yeah, please. Thank you.
Besides mine, there's fear, concern, worry, fear, anxiety, worry, oil, frightened, scared, global disaster, scary, future children, future generations, ugh, protecting the environment, extreme conditions, confusion.
Okay. I'm noticing that I need to take a deep breath. So I want to invite you all to just take a deep breath with me. Try and let some of that worry and fear kind of leave our bodies for a moment. This isn't an easy topic to talk about. There were not even few, there were no expressions of hope, optimism. I actually should have written, I would say hope and optimism is a little bit how I'm feeling as well. And my hope for us all today is that in the next hour, we can help cultivate some hope, drawing from our Jewish traditions, which has been for me, as I've become a new mom in the last 5 years, as we are experiencing the direct impacts of climate change right now, literally, it's what's keeping us home. My Jewish tradition has been a tremendous source of hope and perseverance for me, and I hope that it can be the same for all of you, and that you'll come away with some ideas and tools for how to cultivate that with your families, your community, in your congregation, and beyond. Our people have faced great challenges for millennia, and this is one in a series of challenges that we can face and we can overcome together. And that's really why my colleague, Rabbi Jenny Rosen, started Dayenu a few years ago. Sorry, just a moment, finding my notes. Great. So we launched, and you should be able to adjust on your Zoom screen so that you can see like me, my face speaking with you in half of it, and the slide deck in the other half by toggling in the speaker view. So we launched Dayenu to bring the full people, power, and voice of the American Jewish community to broader movements confronting the climate crisis. Rooted in Jewish values, experience, and spirit, our mission is to secure a just, livable, and sustainable world for all people for generations to come by building a multi-generational Jewish movement that is confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold action. For folks who came back from break a little early, we listened to an original song by musician Rena Branson called L'Dor Vador. Rena wrote this song and produced it as part of Dayenu's call for music to create anthems for the Jewish climate movement. I encourage you to look it up. Maybe we can share out afterwards the link to this song and video. It's so beautiful from generation to generation. And I sing it to Miriam, my 5-year-old. It's one of her bedtime songs. So she knows the words to this one too. Oops. Oh, and I didn't mean to start playing it. I just want to advance my slide. There we go. Sorry. So here again is our mission statement that I just read out loud. And my favorite part of this is that we're confronting the climate crisis with spiritual audacity and bold action. recognizing that there is fear, that there's worry, that there's anxiety, and looking to Jewish leaders, stories from the Talmud that inspire us, like the story of Nachshon, who took the first steps into the Red Sea, encouraging others to follow him. He took a risk. He put himself at risk. I'm sure he was scared and nervous and worried. And then acting as a community, as the story goes, we were able to cross the sea together. So we used to think of climate change as a far away problem, something that our grandkids would have to deal with decades from now, not a clear and present danger. But as a result of the mining, drilling, and burning of fossil fuels, that's coal, gas, and oil, as somebody said in their comment, for the past century, we are already on a path to a world that is dangerously hotter, wetter, more extreme, and ultimately more unequal, because those least responsible for emissions, Black, brown, Indigenous, poor, and historically marginalized communities, are the people who suffer the most, even as the impacts of climate change reach everybody everywhere. 2023 was the hottest year on record. Think about that. This last year we all just lived through, the hottest year on record. In the last 5 years, 9 in 10 Americans, that's most of us, 9 in 10 Americans, that's most everybody here, have experienced the impacts of climate change and extreme weather firsthand. And actually, with this whole group living here in Los Angeles today, it's 10 out of 10 here, right? I just had a conversation with my daughter. Again, she's 5 years old. Yesterday, we were talking about the storms that were coming and what to expect. She said, "Why are the storms so big?" And I was able to tell her, well, the oceans are warming. The warm ocean makes the air warmer. It causes bigger storms. Well, why are the oceans too warm, Mama? Well, the pollution that we release into the atmosphere warms the ocean. That's what's going on with this atmospheric river. So this isn't something in the future, it's in the present. And it's not just our kids' generation or our grandkids' generation that is responsible for figuring this out. And that's why we say, Dayenu, we have had enough. The good news is that we know exactly what we need to do. We need to slash greenhouse gas emissions by the end of this decade and build a clean energy economy that is accessible to all. And while we can't stop climate change from happening, emissions persist in the atmosphere for decades, we can still prevent the most devastating impacts of climate change. But to avert climate disaster, we need to take action on a systemic level. Because while personal practices like reducing meat consumption and communal practices like greening institutions are important, if every single person and institution significantly lowered our own carbon footprint, we would still not avoid the most catastrophic impacts of climate change. As Dayenu advisory board member and longtime climate leader and activist Bill McKibben writes, the climate crisis is no longer yields to individual actions. There is no way to make the math work, one vegan dinner or Tesla at a time at this point. The most important thing an individual can do is be less of an individual and join movements sharp enough to make change. To make change on a systemic level. We need to not just focus on what car do I buy, but what cars does Detroit manufacture? Not just where do I bank, but why are the biggest banks in the world investing in fossil fuels and how do we change that? Not just what candidate do I vote for, but how can we compel every elected official to take climate action? The fossil fuel companies that have long delayed and denied large-scale climate action, we know that. They want us to focus on our individual consumption habits and to stop there, to feel good about that. They don't want us thinking big, believing a whole other way it's possible. Okay, there is good news. The good news is renewables, electric vehicles, efficient housing, manufacturing are cheap, abundant, and becoming even more widespread now that we have passed monumental, historic federal climate legislation. Woo, and Zoom sometimes does like the little fireworks. Like now is when I want Zoom to send the fireworks off for me. We have the science, we have the technology, we have the wind at our backs. So we also say, Dayenu, we have enough. I want to get my slideshow back in the mix here. All right, do we see that? No, that's the wrong screen. Sorry. Here we go. There we go. So climate change is something that Jewish Americans care deeply about. You're not the only one. According to PRRI, the Public Religion Research Institute, more than 80% of American Jews are concerned about climate change, and it is consistently among the top issue that Jewish voters consider when casting a ballot. In fact, as recently as 2021 and 2022, it was the #1 issue, according to 3 different polls. I bet that comes as a surprise to many folks here. It was a surprise to me, even though I work at a Jewish climate change organization. It's like it's the #1 issue that none of us are like talking about is the #1 Jewish issue. And yet, climate change is not seen as a core Jewish issue, even though this is an all hands on deck moment and no one can sit this out. So that's why Dayenu exists, to provide American Jews opportunities to come off the sidelines and take the kind of bold action that this moment demands. We advance comprehensive federal and state climate policies, for example, being a key part of the mobilization, the year and a half long mobilization that built on a decade of organizing to pass $375 billion in climate investments in the Inflation Reduction Act, the biggest investment in clean energy in US history. We press candidates and elected officials to act. This year, we will be reaching out to hundreds of thousands of Jewish and infrequent climate voters in a nonpartisan way through our Chutzpah 2024 campaign to ensure that they know what's at stake in the upcoming elections and how and where to vote. And as you can see here, this is Senator Chuck Schumer at a Dayenu-led rally in Prospect Park that was organized in part by the Dayenu Circle or the Dayenu chapter at his own congregation Beth Elohim in Brooklyn, New York. We also work to end financial backing for the fossil fuel industry. We recently launched a new campaign called All Our Might, Bechol Meodecha, focused on pushing large banks and asset managers that provide financial backing for the fossil fuel industry to leave behind dirty energy and invest in the future. And we're working hand in hand with Jewish institutions to do the same. And we mobilize the American Jewish community to act during key political and cultural moments. For example, as I said, we showed up in force at rallies in Washington, D.C. and across the country, pushing for President Biden and Congress to act urgently and pass bold climate legislation, which they did. The Jewish community is hungry for opportunities to take meaningful action. We are right now in the middle of Taking Down Goliath, which is our latest in a series of climate action and organizing workshops for young people. We've got an amazing group of about 45 young people from across the US. And I can say that for 3.5 years of working at Dayenu, it often feels like we're drinking out of a fire hose. fire hose. Like so many people are looking for a path into action, and our small team is doing our best to support them all. We do our work in a few ways. We're connecting communities and institutions to build a movement across the country that harnesses the collective power of American Jews of every generation and background and adds our voices to national and global movements confronting the climate crisis. We are building out a network of Dayenu circles, which are small, locally based groups of people who are Jewish and climate concerned. They can be based at synagogues, in neighborhoods, at a JCRC or federation. There's a Dayenu circle at the Jewish Federation of Silicon Valley. There are nearly 100 Dayenu circles across the US, including 4 here in Southern California, and about a dozen in Northern California. And these groups work with us on national campaigns and programs and also take on local and state climate work in our own communities or at the state level. And for anybody here who is inspired by this talk and our conversation today, it wouldn't be too hard to get a Dayenu circle, a chapter started at Valley Beth Shalom. Many Dayenu circles are, it's sort of the Tikkun Olam Committee or the Social Justice Committee, a green team, and you can affiliate as a Dayenu circle as well and tap into this rich network we have across the country. We also believe in the power of partnerships. In the Jewish community, we work most closely with Adama and the Jewish Youth Climate Movement, the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism, the Jewish Theological Seminary, I should say also as a conservative congregation. The Conservative Seminary, JTS in New York, we've had a partnership with JTS for the past 4 years, hosting rabbinic fellows as year-long fellows with Dayenu. And I've had the delight of supervising many a future rabbi to help them integrate climate action into their rabbinate. We work with more than 60 different Jewish communal organizations and dozens of interfaith and secular partners, too many to name here. We represent and connect the Jewish community to the broader climate movement in the United States. And critically, we consult and partner with environmental justice groups who for too long have been living on the front lines of poverty, racism, and pollution without a voice in the process. And for those who were here for Zev Yaroslavsky's talk, I thought he really spoke beautifully and right on about how we live in a society with people that we interact with every day and people that we don't interact with every day, but who are still part of the movement for justice and the need for justice. And we also—
Vicki, this is Joel. There was a viewer question. What
Sure.
about the Orthodox communities? Are they worried about climate change? They resist science as evolution. So how does that reconcile?
Yeah, well, I can tell you as a multi-denominational organization, we do work with quite a number of Orthodox rabbis or modern Orthodox rabbis. We have a couple Dayenu circles that are rooted in modern Orthodox congregations. And one of our staff members, Rabbi Jacob Siegel, who is actually Dayenu's climate finance advisor. He's a modern Orthodox rabbi, finance expert, and he just published a book about aligning our Jewish values with our investments. And I was going to hold it up, but it's actually by my bedside table in my bedroom instead of in my office. Maybe if we have a break, I'll go grab it. So I can't speak, I grew up in a conservative congregation. I'm now a member of Nefesh, which is multi-denominational, and here in Northeast LA where I live. So I have less direct experience, but I can tell you from our work at Dayenu, there are many people within the Orthodox movement that kind of are with us on climate change as an urgent issue. Thanks for the question, and thank you, Joel, for flagging it. I wanted to, talking about building Jewish institutional power. Actually, this relates to your question. We really do believe in the power of Jewish institutions and movements, not just as partners in our campaigns, but as change agents themselves. And by Jewish institution, I can mean a denomination, large organizations like Jewish federations, individual congregations like your own. So whether that's greening facilities, putting solar roofs on your congregation, like many have set out to do, or doing advocacy on climate policy with Dayenu, or aligning your investments with Jewish values, like all of that are ways that we would love to support Hazak at VBS and the broader VBS community to do. Jewish communal organizations have a crucial role to play. I don't know if folks here are thinking about this, but some of you might be wondering whether climate is too partisan or too hot button for, a synagogue to confront. It's not an unreasonable question considering how the issue is discussed on Capitol Hill or in the media, but climate is not a Republican or a Democratic issue. The reality is that vast majorities of voters of all political persuasions believe the science, want to cut pollution, and build clean energy. Climate, like most other issues, may be more partisan in Washington, D.C., but that often isn't the case at the state and local level. Many states, including Massachusetts with a Democratic legislature and Republican governor, and policies in other states, conservative evangelicals, utilities, even coal miners are getting behind clean energy transition. And as I mentioned before, excuse me, I made a mistake about Massachusetts. That was from last year. They used to have a Republican governor. And even here in California, when we had a Republican governor, we were still moving forward on environmental and climate action. And as I mentioned before, Jews really do care about climate. We really care about climate. In the Jewish community and country as a whole, you're far more likely to encounter someone who's sympathetic but doesn't know what to do than somebody who is outright opposed to climate action. By refusing to engage, we give credence to the argument that this crisis is truly existential. And that's another form of climate denial, from abortion to criminal justice, federations, congregations, JCRCs. We have experience with difficult conversations. I want to address also sort of the spiritual element of our work at Dayenu and climate change. As we just got a small taste of at the beginning of our conversation today, facing up to climate change can be deeply paralyzing. We've all read the headlines. We're experiencing the change in our plans today, for example, and it's easy to turn away. It can feel too big to solve or to wrap our arms around. We don't want to look up, right? As last year's movie said. That's why at Dayenu, we root all of our work spiritually through what we call spiritual adaptation, adapting to the new reality of facing this existential crisis. Dayenu offers workshops, resources, climate Torah, ritual, music, and art. And we support American Jews to confront the reality of the climate crisis and to grapple with the deep spiritual and existential questions that it raises. Rooted in Jewish wisdom, tradition, ritual, and voice, we seek to provide pathways for people to confront and move through our feelings of fear, anxiety, and powerlessness. As I had shared a little bit of earlier, for, the first 3 years of our organization, we mobilized thousands of Jews across the country to take action, whether blowing shofars with Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer during the high holidays to pass crucial federal climate legislation, or delivering matzah to the offices. Do I have a picture of this? No. Delivering matzah to the offices of banks and asset managers, signaling the urgency that we need to move our dough and leave fossil fuels behind, or reaching out to hundreds of thousands of Jewish and climate voters as part of our chutzpah campaign to get out the vote. There's no shortage of work to be done, and Jewish people of all ages across the country are stepping up to join this movement. There are a few ways that Valley Beth Shalom can become part of the growing Jewish climate movement to bring about the level of change that is urgently needed. As I shared briefly earlier, Avery has joined our team to help organize the Jewish Climate Summit in Southern California. We're looking at either May 5th or May 19th, 2 Sundays in May that are not Pesach, Mother's Day, or Memorial Day weekend. So mark your calendars for Sunday, May 5th, Sunday, May 19th. We'll confirm the date with you. But we're going to be bringing hundreds of people from Jewish communities across Los Angeles for a day of spirit, of workshops, of great speeches, and moving into action for a campaign that I'll share with you all in a moment that is particularly important in California this year. This photo that you're seeing now is the New York Jewish Climate Action Summit held last April with 250 people at Temple Sha'arei Tefillah on the Upper West Side. That's New York City Comptroller Brad Lander in the front row. That's Peggy Shepard, an environmental justice hero and leader of the group We Act for Environmental Justice. It was an incredible time and excited to bring that energy to California. So a few ways that you can get involved. Join us, join Dayenu. If you go to dayenu.org, you're all on your computers right now. So I don't mind if you're doing this while we're chatting. But unlike if we were in person, it might be rude to get your phones out. It's not rude right now. So go ahead. You can go to dayenu.org, enter your email address, sign up. We send emails a couple times a month. It's not that often, but you'll get sort of the insight from the Jewish climate movement and opportunities for action. And if you're on social media, follow us at Join Dayenu. That's a great way to follow along for upcoming events, when we have workshops in Los Angeles, calls to action, and also, how climate action connects with the various holidays that we recognize and celebrate. You can start a Dayenu circle at VBS, as we've talked about. It's easy enough to say, hey, we're participating in climate action, and these calls to action, our Tikkun Olam committee would like to be considered a Dayenu circle. And Avery is the person to talk to about that. And Avery, maybe drop your email address in the chat. Our current campaign right now, which we'll talk about in our text study, we are collecting postcards to Governor Newsom, calling on Governor Newsom to make sure that these billions of dollars in funds that have been released by the Federal Inflation Reduction Act, that they get to the communities that need them the most. So here's the thing about that, the Inflation Reduction Act. It was a federal law, and it directed each state in the nation to come up with their own rules for dispersing that money. So beginning of 2024, where we are right now, the governor, the legislature, state regulators, they're all having meetings and making decisions about how to get the money to communities for rebates, for home appliances, to decarbonize. So all of those decisions are being made now. In December for Hanukkah, we sent Dayenu circles across California, sent hundreds of postcards to Governor Newsom. We're looking to do that again to keep the pressure up and to use the opportunity of Purim gatherings and carnivals to gather postcard signatures, and also to put together little Purim gift baskets, mishloach manot, and deliver those to the governor and his representatives in the days around Purim. So I'd love for you to be involved in that and bring your creativity and VBS's Purim spirit to that. Please attend the Southern California Jewish Climate Summit on either May 5th or May 19th. Bring a delegation from VBS. And consider also aligning your investments with Jewish values by leaving fossil fuels behind. If you have questions or want to chat with us, we'd love to talk. You can get in touch directly with Avery at dayenu.org. Joel dropped Avery's email in the chat. You can also, reach out to circles@dayenu.org, and that reaches our whole organizing team. I'll stop my screen share for a bit, and I'll just close this portion by reflecting a little bit on my own experience in the climate movement and my Judaism. I have been an organizer and an activist since I was a college student. in North Carolina in the early 2000s, and got involved with the farm worker movement in North Carolina at a time when I was also learning about my own family's history of coming to this country. These were not stories that my family had told a lot as a kid, but as a college student, I started asking more questions, getting more curious. And I came to understand that my mother's grandfather, who was the first immigrant to the country from Lithuania, he had worked as a window washer in New York City at the time that the skyscrapers were going up. He had a small window washing business, but I take it that like that kind of work was like not uncommon for his generation. It was a very dangerous job, washing windows 100 years ago before we had some of the safety regulations that we have today. And he lost his life on the job. He fell and left my grandmother, who I was named after, my grandma Vera, who was a little girl, 4 little girls. And this was the experience of my family. Now, interesting why this was not a like much talked about story in my family lore, since it, in my mind, would have like very clearly defined the immigrant experience. But my experience as a college student, getting to know farm workers who were picking the cucumbers that were turned into pickles and sold in jars, and talk about like a social justice issue to get a Jewish kid involved. It was pickles. It was like literally jars of pickles. You know, hearing their stories of the conditions under which they were laboring as migrant workers in the American South, it was like, oh my gosh, 100 years later, of course, there are still immigrants still being called upon to do these very intense jobs. And it's people coming from a different part of the world with different traditions than my own. But what have I learned from my own ancestry that calls me to play a role as a student where I can to help workers organize? A few years after I graduated college, farm workers in North Carolina organized the first farm worker union in the state, have a voice on the job. And it was actually through that work with the farm worker movement that I first started to learn about environmental justice and how, for example, when the days are hotter and drier, people working outside all day long bear the brunt of that. And if they don't have a legal right to breaks, water breaks, it's even more dangerous. And I've really followed the call to climate action and climate justice from the farm worker movement that first got me inspired to live a political life and to organize my communities and my people to be on the side of justice. So it's been incredibly moving to be part of a Jewish climate organization and to bring more people into a movement that really will define this generation for future generations to come. So I want to take a pause for some questions from you all. You've been such a great audience. And then we'll see if we have a little bit of time either for the text study or to actually take a little action on a California campaign, since we have about 20 minutes left. So
Vicki, there were a couple questions I forwarded to you. One was, what about climate deniers? How do we deal with that, or how should that be addressed?
Yeah. Well, the good news is that there are actually not that many climate deniers. Particularly within the American Jewish community, 80% of American Jews are concerned about the climate crisis. We get it, we know it's real, and it worries us. So on the one hand, I would say, don't worry too much about the deniers and focus on that 80% of people who are with us, but maybe aren't taking action yet, either because they haven't been invited to or asked to by somebody that they trust and care about, or they're stuck. So that's really what Dayenu is focused on, is organizing and inviting into action that huge swath of 80% of American Jews that are concerned about climate change. Now, for climate deniers that are outside of the Jewish community, there's still a small percentage of the population. And it's my view, and it's Dayenu's view, that we focus on building our power so that we can make and guide the decisions about climate policy and to isolate the voices of climate deniers. That is more valuable way of spending our precious time and resources on bringing more people who have been neutralized than to try to persuade people who have dug their heels in on climate denial.
You focused a lot on American Jewry. What about international Jewry? Is there the same positive support, and what's happening in other countries?
Yeah. Dayenu does focus from day one of our organization specifically on US climate policy and the US Jewish community. We have had some interest from Jewish communities in Canada who have started Dayenu circles, and I've had conversations with them and said, our campaign right now is focused on passing legislation through the US Congress. So I can't speak to you. I can't help you on Canadian legislation. But they have used the Dayenu Circle structure to organize their own campaigns, in particular focused on the Royal Bank of Canada, which is actually one of the world's biggest investors in fossil fuels. Beyond the US and Canada, I couldn't tell you, I don't know that research in terms of voting attitudes or priorities among Jewish communities in other countries. I see a question, is there any possibility of connecting with Greta Thunberg? Sure, I mean, she DM her on Instagram, I don't know. No, but to get at what I think is behind that question, Dayenu, sort of like in the and also connecting with the question of like the international arena, Dayenu has not yet, like we've never attended or sent a delegation to say the Conference of the Parties, the international gathering where the Paris Agreement, was created. Our partners at Adama have done that. But my colleague, Dalia Rockowitz, who's our director of campaigns and partnerships, she's a climate policy expert, and she will often do explainers on video, breaking down what's happening on the international scene. So I would say Dayenu operates in the climate movement networks that Greta has created and inspired, but no, we don't have a direct personal relationship with her.
So there's a question here about what is Dayenu's relationship with Browerman Fellows from the Federation?
Yes, I'm so glad that you asked. Who asked that question? I'm curious.
I think it's Sandy.
Sandy, thank you for that question. Oh, go ahead. You can unmute and.
My granddaughter has a scholarship from them, and she's they're very involved in the environment. Yes.
Yes, beautiful. So I did not know about the Browerman Scholarship. Maybe I predated it from when I was in college. However, one of the newest Dayenu circles is the Browerman Alumni Dayenu Circle that was started by Lee, blanking on her last name. She was in the first class of the Browerman Scholarship, and she organized her, fellow alumni. They're like a very tight group. And, being millennials and Gen Z, like climate change is like number 1, number 2, and number 3 concern. And so they have a Dayenu circle, and they actually had their first in-person meeting in my mom's backyard over the December break, because people, they live all over the country now, and some folks were home. So 5 of them got together in my mom's backyard in Mar Vista, and they like had their whole meeting, and then I led them in a postcard writing action, and we marched down the street to the mailbox on my mom's corner and like mailed the postcards together. They're great. Yeah.
You'll probably meet a Sophie Berman.
What's the name?
Sophie Berman.
Sophie Berman.
She goes to Berkeley.
Oh, amazing. I think I know the name, because if she's at Berkeley, there's also a Dayenu circle at Berkeley. So yeah, amazing.
Great, thank you.
Amazing, yeah.
So there's a question about what is a 501c3 organization?
Yeah, well, I am not a lawyer, but I have worked for many 501c3 organizations. A 501c3 is a nonprofit organization, similar to a a place of worship. So we're, tax exempt. And we also, I think there's some advantages as a climate organization. I'm just going to change my standing desk to sit down now. There's some advantages as a climate organization to being a C3 and some disadvantages. So some advantages are get out the vote campaign that I hope you will all participate in. We call infrequent environmental voters and help them make a plan to vote. It's a lot of fun. We have Jewish musicians come. We have kavanot from, or like words of intention and teaching from rabbis and other Jewish educators. We make it a lot of fun. The advantage of being a C3 when doing voter outreach is congregations like VBS can sign on and endorse our Get Out the Vote campaign, because what we're doing is we're connecting with infrequent voters and we're helping them make a plan to vote. Now, if we were a C4 or a PAC and we were endorsing candidates, then individual of you who also support the candidate that we've endorsed could volunteer in your own capacity, but VBS could not say, we're going to co-sponsor this event, because as a house of worship, as a 501c3 yourself, you're not allowed to endorse outright particular candidates. However, 501c3s are able to spend, I think it's like less than 10% of our time lobbying for legislation. So it is within the power of a house of worship to spend a portion of its time lobbying for legislation. And here in California, C3s can support or not support a ballot measure. So this is particular to the state of California and to ballot measures. This is actually a great segue into my call to action for today for all of you, an introduction to one of our main campaigns in California, is that raise your hand. If you're on video, raise your hand if, well, no. Well, let's just try it, but I already see the flaw in my question. I was going to say, raise your hand if you know that we drill for oil, like in neighborhoods in Southern California. Yeah, okay. So we all kind of like know it's happening, right? I knew it was happening. I grew up in Mar Vista. We would drive to LAX, right? And you'd pass by these like oil rigs. And like, it was just there. I didn't know at the time or think, and really no one told me that this is like bad and unnecessary, bad for the environment, bad for our health. So in California, 2 million people live within 3,200 feet of an active oil or gas well. It probably does not surprise us at this point that if you live or go to school or seek medical attention near an active oil or gas well, your risk for cancer, for miscarriage, for asthma goes up. It's probably also not a surprise to us at this point that the people who do live closest to oil and gas wells tend to be low income, tend to be immigrant communities, tend to be communities of color. And yet everybody who lives in Los Angeles is within the like distance in which the health impacts are felt by oil and gas drilling, just because there's so much drilling in Southern California. So for more than 10 years, the communities that live near these oil and gas wells, environmental justice communities, have been organizing to put an end to neighborhood oil drilling. Think of it this way. The state of Texas, which is a major oil driller, they drill more oil than California does, but state of Texas, even they have a law saying you cannot drill within 3,200 feet of where people have a house or a school. We did not have that law in California. No regulation about siting oil and gas drills. Wild West, totally, totally wild. So for about 10 years, environmental justice organizations fought through the legislative process, through regulatory process, through the governor, through local city councils to put an end to oil drilling where people live. And in 2022, we finally had a huge victory. Governor Newsom got behind it, and that unlocked the legislature. The legislature passed SB 1147, which ended or created a 3,200-foot setback, so distance requirement for any new oil or gas wells. Huge, huge victory. Hooray. Okay, but then there was bad news. The oil industry, which is one of the most powerful industries in the state of California, was not going to take this lightly because it's against their interest. They spent millions of dollars funding a very deceptive ballot measure or signature campaign, gathering signatures to put this law on the ballot. So we have this process here in California, which also needs reform, where anyone can collect signatures to like put a hold on a law that was passed and then try and overturn it. So this has the effect of the oil industry's campaign had two impacts. One is that SB 1147 is now on hold. So the legislature passed it, the governor signed it, and now it's on hold. And so the state of California continues to permit new oil and gas wells without this buffer zone. And then the other impact of the oil industry's campaign is that now this is going on the ballot. So we all have to show up at the polls this November or with our mail-in ballots and reapprove this legislation that our legislators already passed and that we already fought for. So this is your very early, even before the primary, call to action to everyone here to vote to support the setbacks legislation on the ballot, to tell everyone you know at VBS about it, to make sure that VBS is 100% voting to create this buffer zone to stop drilling near where people are living. This is going to be the focus of our Southern California Jewish Climate Summit that Avery is organizing. Not only are we going to be learning from the organizers that are leading this campaign, but we're also going to be finding out ways that we can help get the word out, because that's the way that we're going to win this. We're never going to have as much money as the oil industry. What we do have is we have our relationships in our communities of people that we can talk to. So we're going to take responsibility for mobilizing Jewish voters in Southern California and up and down the state. We need you to be a part of that. We would love for you to be a part of that. And happy to, in our last few minutes, answer any questions I can about that campaign as well.
So what other synagogues are involved with Dayenu, or what's happening, with other synagogues?
Yeah,
that we might learn from.
Yeah, great. And then I see Barb and Len's hand up. So in Los Angeles, there are Dayenu circles that are more or less active at ICAR, at Nefesh, where I belong, at Temple Israel of Hollywood. There's also the LA County Dayenu Circle, which is led by folks who aren't members of a particular congregation. And then we also have had, there's not a formal Dayenu Circle yet, but people who are active and involved at, what is it? What's the Reconstructionist congregation in the Palisades? KI, Kehilat Israel. Leo Beck, there's also a Dayenu Circle at Leo Beck. And frankly, I live in Glendale, but I'm Dayenu's national director of organizing. I think Avery has the best job in the world because there's so much potential in Los Angeles. There's so many congregations here and people that want to be involved that we just need to call them and meet with them and help them plug in. Also in the Inland Empire, there's a Reform congregation that just started a Dayenu Circle, the Browerman Fellows Circle. So we've got quite a good network here in LA.
Okay, so let's ask Barb and Len to unmute. And Barb or Len, did you have a comment or question?
Moni. I'm so sorry. I'm trying to turn off my phone. I beg your pardon.
Getting an incoming call at the same time, so we'll get back to you.
No, I think we're okay now.
Okay.
Yeah, you're doing wonderful work. Vicki. You're doing
Thank
wonderful.
you.
God bless you. A few things. I heard a long time ago that the primary pollution in California is emissions from cars.
Mm.
Is that accurate? Before I ask you my second question, is that accurate? Is that where it's mostly coming from?
If it's not the number one, it's a top one. Certainly, emissions from I would say vehicles total. So there's cars that you and I might drive, and then there's like heavy trucks. I don't know. Have you all been seeing the UPS and FedEx trucks in my neighborhood? Just like in like the last few months are electric.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, that's been cool to see. Yep.
Okay, so that being the case, one of my biggest peeves, and I've lost friends over this, is that when you drive on the 405, count the hybrids. Count them. There aren't very many of them.
Mm.
So there's an institutional problem I want to ask you about.
Mm-hmm.
Incentive for people to get rid of, we have hybrids, we don't have electric cars, we have hybrids, to have an incentive by making affordable cars, good trade-ins, government subsidies, so that these car dealers who sell, very high-powered cars,
Mm-hmm.
not to do that. What about that? What about that approach? Do you think it's useless? Yeah. Is there any way that the government will ever pay attention to this?
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. You are absolutely on the right track, and government is finally starting to catch up a bit thanks to organizing, thanks to people showing up and organizing and making our voices heard. So the Inflation Reduction Act does include incentives for US made electric vehicles. And Governor Newsom also, oh gosh, was this in 2022 or 2023, set a goal for California. Somebody else might have the specifics better than me here, but basically to stop producing gas-powered vehicles for use in California in 2035, like something that's too far off, but that is a goal and provides a transition period. So we are like right now at the start of this transition that we should have started 20 years ago. But look, from a Jewish perspective, like we hold saving a life above like every other, over everything else. And I think about that a lot with my focus now on climate change and climate action, is that every choice that we make now, large scale choice, like what you're talking about, Barb, in terms of moving, the automobile industry to electric, that is going to save many, many lives in the future. People that we don't know, that we won't know. But by limiting the intensity of climate change, because there's no going back. We've already impacted the climate. But every 0.1 degree of warming that we can limit from here on out is going to save countless lives. So finally, government and the automobile industry is catching up a little bit. But I would say even more so than the individual purchases we make, showing up for lobby days, calling your state legislators, getting behind, organized campaigns, right? Organized groups. That's what's going to influence the biggest policy.
So Vicki, we are almost out of time. We got a minute left.
Yeah.
But I thank you so much for sort of informing us and stimulating us to think about what role we might play, not only as Hazak but as Valley Beth Shalom itself in this Jewish approach toward climate change. So we thank you for that. I have your contact information. For some reason, I can't copy and paste from the individual messages here. So I don't know why I can't do that, but I will get the information out. And again, thank you so much, and Avery, for joining. Welcome to your new job. And we look forward to hearing more, hopefully.
Yeah. Thank you all so much. Thank you for the invitation. And beautiful to see this community thriving, and stay safe out there, everyone.